All right, friends, it is 2 o'clock on the eastern coast of the United States, and we are ready to go live. Let's see, I see that there are already almost 100 of you ready to watch. So we are going to be working on month 2 today. And if you have been following this series, you should have put together a little binder for yourself that has all of the handouts because I give you guys handouts every single month. So if you have the handout that looks like this, that has a series of information from the very beginning, the getting started, you know that today is the lesson on freezer paper applique. So freezer paper applique is what we're learning today. It's a method that can be done by machine. So I've got my little girl right here, or it can be done by hand. So today I'm going to teach you both ways to do it. So if you're ready to get started, tell me yes. Don't forget, one of the ways that we can bring you all of this content for free is by asking your friends to like and subscribe and ring that bell so that you get the latest information from the Jelly Roll Club. So if you are ready to learn about freezer paper applique, today's your day. As you can see behind me, this is a little bit different format than a traditional tutorial in that it is a complete lesson. So you get to learn the process from start to finish. So last month we started with Janice. And as you can see, there's my Janice up there, and he's already been sashed. And then I put my little house right next to him. And so if you are ready to go, we're going to get started with month 2 of the applique series. So let's look at our handout for month 2, and I'll tell you what's going on. So I'm going to rotate my camera downward, and I'm going to show you what we have going on. And welcome. Just so you know, what is the Jelly Roll Club? The Jelly Roll Club is a group of friends that got together about 5 years ago at a local quilt shop, and we decided that we wanted to make things together as a group. But we didn't want to necessarily make the same quilt. And so we put all of our jelly rolls together, and we decided that we were going to vote on a project, and then we were going to work on that project throughout the year. So guess what? You are part of the Jelly Roll Club, which means that you also get to vote. And that's why we're here today. We're a little bit early because you guys voted in the community tab of YouTube and said you wanted to do February early. So it was earlier than I was going to do it. So here we are. Okay. So let's get started. The first thing that you should have is a handout that looks like this. And as you can see from the handout, this shows you the 3 blocks that are in the February pattern. So in the February pattern, you should have Fabio, the handsome Spanish lover. You also have the birdhouse, which I'm going to put here on my quilt. And you also have the large pine tree, which can be down here, and it can be decorated like a Christmas tree if you want. So hello to all my friends. Let's see who's here with us today. We have Linda and Robin. Oh, we have Brenda from Kentucky. Hi, Brenda. So some of you have already started and have already finished Fabio the Gnome. Do you see this handsome guy? He has a friend. I don't know if she's his girlfriend, but maybe he wants her to be his girlfriend, and that's Felicia. And so this is Felicia, the girly gnome. As you can see, she has hands, which you guys asked for, and she also has braids, and she has a speech bubble that tells people that she loves them. Felicia loves scrapbooking and knitting sweaters for her kitty cats, but maybe Fabio can talk her into doing something else other than knitting sweaters for her cat. You have a Christmas tree, and like I said, it goes on the bottom of the quilt, and you have that happy birdhouse. It's called Gnome Sweet Gnome number 2. And so we're giving everybody a chance to jump in, and we're getting ready to get started. You should have printed your pattern that has pieces that look like this, pieces that look like that. And today I'm going to show you how to do freezer paper applique, which is a method that can be done either by machine or by hand. Freezer paper applique is something that you may be familiar with, but I'm going to teach you lots of tips. And it is used best when you have large shapes like this that are kind of curved, and you want to give it the look of traditional needle turn applique. And so this is an easy prep method for doing that. So welcome, everybody. I'm super excited. If you are having trouble printing, I will do another couple of tutorials to help you with that. But also know that when this project started, I didn't know that we were going to have so many people interested in gnomes. I thought I was just doing this for a few of my friends. But so far, we have had like 70,000 views on the gnome series. And so we have a lot of people that have joined us. So what I'm going to do is over the next few weeks before the next lesson in February, which is the third week of February, I'm going to be working behind the scenes to create a new website to make it easier for you to click and download the pattern. So I understand your frustration if you're having problems downloading. I'm just using a free website that I had for the past 5 years. So I'm going to be moving to a new website to help you download the patterns easier and faster, make it easier to navigate. So that's what I'm going to be working on. All right, friends, let's get started. First, I'm going to show you the supplies that we're going to use if you're going to use traditional freezer paper applique. And as you can see behind me, that's fusible. So just like last month, I did Felicia. I'm going to put Fabio next to her. And I've already started putting my main quilt together. So let me show you what my main quilt is going to look like. Okay. And so let me show you. So my main quilt, and I have right here the pattern for Gnome, Sweet Gnome. But my main quilt is going to look like this. And this image will go on the finished website. So my finished quilt is going to be 60 approximately by 80. I'm going to have outer borders that are approximately 5.5 inches finished. And my quilt's going to look something like this. I'm going to put my January gnome here. And then this is a little gnome home, which is a filler block because there are 12 gnomes, 6 homes, and 2 filler blocks. Okay, so I have Janice, and then this is Fabio. So we have Janice and Fabio, and we've already completed this little gnome home. So we're going to keep working on all of these little patterns throughout the year, and I'm going to teach a different type of applique. If you are struggling downloading the pattern, your device, if it's a telephone or a tablet, you need the Google Drive app, and that helps you to download it because all the patterns are stored on my Google Drive. So this is what my quilt looks like, if you're wondering. And so that is what I'm working towards. You may choose not to make a quilt. You might decide that you just want to make individual blocks and not make a quilt at all, and that's okay too. So let's get started, and I'm going to show you freezer paper applique, and I'm going to be making the little birdhouse gnome home, okay? So let's get started. Are you guys ready? So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to take this, and I'm going to use the following supplies. I've got my pattern ready. I'm going to be using Reynolds kitchen freezer paper. Now this freezer paper comes in a big giant roll, and you can use this for a long time. It's different than butcher paper, and it has a paper side, and then it has a shiny wax side, right? And so the shiny wax side is what I'm going to be using to adhere to my fabric because it won't leave any residue. And so I'll get started by grabbing a piece of freezer paper first. I'm just going to pull it out of here. And I'm going to stop and answer a couple of questions. So the first thing that I'm going to do, somebody wants to know how I have my design board hanging. And so let me show you what I've got. This is a Fons and Porter design wall. It's not a very expensive design wall. And then what I did is I built a PVC frame. And then I have it pinned to the top so that I could take it up and down. And you know what's back there? My ironing board. So it's just a temporary design wall that I can set up anywhere. So if you live in a small house or a small apartment and you don't want to make marks on your walls, you can simply hang your design wall on a very inexpensive, I have 4 pieces of PVC pipe, and I made some feet. And then I can take it down, roll it up, and slide it under a bed whenever I'm not using it. So this is my design wall. And so do me a huge favor. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we're going to get started. Okay, so I need a piece of freezer paper. I'm just going to rip this out. And it just needs to be bigger than my pattern. So I'm going to fold this in half. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. All right. So freezer paper is a handy dandy thing in the sewing room because you can iron it to fabric and you can cut it the size of a piece of regular paper. And if you have an inkjet printer, you can print a design right on the back of your freezer paper to cut out your shapes. And that's a great way of doing things for this project. But for today, I have a copy of my pattern and I'm going to be cutting this out and I'm going to be attaching it to the paper side of my freezer paper. So this is the glossy side and this is the paper side. So I'm going to use 100% washable Elmer's glue. And I'm going to take this pattern and I'm going to cut it out in its entirety. And I'm going to stick it on the back of my freezer paper with glue. So I'm going to rough cut it. Oops, did you guys see that? My big scissors got out of hand and I cut into that, but it won't even matter. Okay, so I'm just cutting on those lines. And now I am going to take this birdhouse roof and I'm going to glue it down on the paper side. So this is the shiny side and this is the paper side. And I'm going to take my glue stick. I'm going to glue that down. Glue my pattern straight down. This is 100% washable. So if you get a little bit on yourself, it doesn't matter. If you get a little bit on your fabric, it doesn't matter because it'll wash out. It'll come out in the wash. And so I'm going to glue that down completely like this. And this is a great pattern for this technique because it has large kind of organic lines. So this is a great technique for this. And while I'm cutting, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, I will answer them. My design wall is made with PVC pipe and I hung an inexpensive Fons and Porter design wall. But you could use a flannel sheet and pin it to your curtains. So if you see behind me, you see this room I'm in, there's a curtain rod. You can actually hang a flannel sheet to that curtain rod, pin it across the top, use that as your design wall. When you're done, you can take it down and never damage your walls. And so I'm going to keep cutting. So there you have it. I have the house itself. I have the roof. And I have the grassy knoll that goes on this house right here. And so this is great, a great technique if you're doing flowers and you want to do individual petals. If you're doing circles, this is a great technique for doing applique circles. I love this technique for all types of things. And when I'm cutting details, sometimes I find that my big scissors are a nuisance, so I just chuck them because I have a pile of scissors. And I'm going to show you guys my pile of scissors. Yeah. I have a pile of scissors. And then I just pick whatever scissors I want and I grab them. And then I put them away nice and neat when I'm done. But when I'm working, sometimes I just make a big pile of scissors in front of me and I keep cutting. So that's how it goes, right? All right. So all the little gnomes that we've done thus far are on the Jelly Roll site, including the newest little guy that I made, Baby Nate. Baby Nate is in honor of my grandson who was just born. And so that's where all the patterns are. It says, why not just trace the pattern on freezer paper? Great question. Why am I not just tracing it on freezer paper? This makes it nice and thick, and I'm going to explain why in just a minute. So I'm going to glue all of these down onto the back of my freezer paper, including the little mushroom guy. And for those of you who are doing other applique quilts, like there's a pattern that a lot of people are doing right now that's called Not Quite 1,000 Leaves. They show you how to do a variety of methods. And this method is the one that I have found works best, because by gluing this pattern down, I'm making my paper much thicker, and it will hold up better when I am getting ready to use my next step, which involves using a little bit of starch. And so this is the stem for the little mushroom cap. And so there we have it. So now we have the mushroom bottom, because we have a little mushroom in front of this house. Then we have the mushroom top, and I have this. Now my window I will make at a later time, because I'm going to make it as a separate unit, and then I'm going to attach it last. And so now I'm going to glue my grassy knoll over here. I'm going to attach my little mushroom here. And I'm going to glue this little guy right there. And so I'm actually cutting this out twice. In order to make my fusible freezer paper pattern. And this is not a permanent fusible. This is a temporary fusible. So freezer paper will stick to your fabric for many, many ironings, most of the time like 5 or 6. And then after that, it loses its stickiness, but it leaves no residue. And so this type of applique that I'm doing today is one type of what's called smooth edge applique. So smooth edge applique is what we're working on today. And I am using a freezer paper technique. And this technique enables us to imitate the look of needle turn without actually doing needle turn. So if you are a newbie to needle turn and you're nervous and you said, gosh, I don't think that I could ever do that, this is a good way to kind of dive into needle turn applique for the very first time. You could try it with just like a little tiny part of your design, or you could try it with just a single element. So let's say the windows or the roof. But there's my pattern piece for the grass. It has the shiny side on this side of the freezer paper, and then it has my paper on the other side, my paper pattern. And yes, you could use washable school glue. Somebody said if you could use washable school glue. I find that the liquid glue wrinkles my paper sometimes a little bit. So for this technique, I use this glue, the glue stick. And this one is like the purple disappearing glue stick. So that's a great question. Let's see if we have any new questions. Oh, thank you to the ones who sent congratulations for my new grandchild. I was super excited to have grandbaby number 3. Being a grandma is like the best thing in the whole wide world. I tell you, there's nothing like it. None of my kids are my favorite because I like my grandkids best. That's what I say all the time. All right, so I have this, and that's done. Maybe I just fling that in the floor and vacuum it later. So this is a process that takes a little bit of prep time, but once you do it, you could actually use this template many times over. You could actually use this template down the road if you really wanted to trace onto fusible. because it leaves it kind of stiff, almost like cardboardy. And so it makes it so where you can reuse this to trace and do other techniques if you really wanted to. So I'm making a total of 2 quilts. One is going to be hand appliqued and one is going to be fused. And so this one is going to be for my hand applique quilt. All right, move all that stuff out of my way. Save all your bits. I save all of my fusible interfacing like this in a little bag, my cuttings, because sometimes those come in handy. But my freezer paper I usually don't save. So I'm going to get all the bits off of there. So I have the roof of the house. I have the little body of the house and the little grassy knoll. And so because in my quilt, this is further on in the spring, I'm going to make a grassy knoll that's made out of lighter green than what I've been using in my other gnome. So if you notice, my other gnomes over here, one has a snowy drift. The other one has kind of a brown dead grass, because that's what grass looks like right now in my neck of the woods. And if you see Felicia's, she's also standing on kind of muddy dirt, right? So don't forget, depending on where you live, so maybe it's summer where you are. If you're in the southern hemisphere, then maybe your grassy knoll is going to be bright green, or maybe you're gonna put your little gnomes on a surfboard at the beach. And we've had a few people do that. All right, so let me show you what's happening. All right, so now that I've got all of these little things, right, this little stem down here at the bottom. And like I said, this particular technique works great when you have kind of big shapes that have gentle curves. And it takes all that scariness out of needle turn applique. So if you want to begin needle turn, this is a great way to start. All right, so I have my little mushroom for my house. I have my roof, and I have the house unit itself. So we're going to start simply by picking up the grass. And so what I have here is a jelly roll strip. And I'm going to iron this particular piece onto my jelly roll strip. And then I'm going to turn the edges. So let me show you what I'm going to do. So this is the back of the fabric. And I'm going to iron my grassy knoll with a hot iron onto the back of my fabric. So look at there, it sticks, but it leaves no residue. And so now I have my grassy knoll. And so the very first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to set these aside so I don't lose them. Do not lose things in your sewing room ever, right? I lose it all the time. And now we're going to go to the next step of this method, right? So freezer paper now is nice and thick, feels like cardboard. It's attached to the back of my fabric, which is why these are reversed. And now I'm going to take regular old starch. I use Faultless Premium. And I'm going to use these little medicine cups that you have left over when your kids are sick and they send these to you. I'm going to spray some starch in this container, and I'm going to use a little paintbrush to starch the edges, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to spray some of the starch in here, and it'll foam up, which is why I like these little cups. Some people use the lid of their starch, but then I have to wash it out. So I just like these little medicine cups. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to trim. So I'm going to use my serrated scissors, and I'm going to trim away from that freezer paper about 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to leave a big generous. It's not a 1/4 inch seam at all. It's a nice big generous seam. And let me flip my camera so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So if you're here for the first time and you missed the beginning, don't worry. The instant replay will be available at 4 o'clock. So the instant replay is available at 4 o'clock. But here I am. I've already glued the pattern down to the paper side of the freezer paper. And now I have cut it out like this. So I have a nice generous, can you guys see that? Nice generous amount of fabric. And so now I'm going to begin the process of turning this over. And this is what makes this look like needle turn applique. So this is the form of smooth edge applique, but this method is with starch. So it uses just a little bit of glue, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to wash some starch onto the edge, and I'm going to pull it back. And this is one of the reasons why I also glue my pattern, is because it makes it thicker and heavier, and it holds up better when I start to press this edge. And so I'm just going to pull it like this, and I'm going to let it dry. And I'm going to carefully clip and pull all of these little pieces all the way around. And this is why this is called smooth edge, because the edge is turned. Okay. Somebody wanted to know where the baby gnome pattern. The baby gnome pattern is at the end of the main February pattern. And so I'm going to clip a few of these a little bit, not too close to my paper, but about halfway in. I'm just going to clip all the way around about halfway. And I found my duckbill scissors for those who were wondering. So I'm just going to clip about every half inch, halfway, and that'll make it easier for me to turn all of those little edges under, especially in these curvy areas. So see, that is drying on me, and that's perfect, and it's sticking as well. So I'm going to get a little bit more starch, and I'm going to baste this with starch inside. And so I'm going to lower my camera so you can see it even closer. So I'm literally going to take the starch, and I'm going to literally cover that little bit of fabric with the starch. So I'm just brushing it on like if I were painting. And then I'm going to set this aside, and then I'm going to bring this while it's wet, and I'm going to pull it just like this towards the middle. And what that's doing is that is easing all of my fabric towards the middle. And if you find that you're burning your fingers, which I've done a couple of times, so be very careful with this. You can always use a little tiny mini iron. And I have, this iron is pretty small, and this is why I like this one rather than a full-size iron. But I also have a secondary iron that I use for this technique. And it is a clover mini iron. So if you have one of these little mini irons, this is really good for this technique as well, because it enables you to get in here and do it without touching it. You can also use the tip of your scissors to kind of hold and press with this one. So if you have one of these little irons, this is a great technique for this one. And so here we go. I'm going to go all the way around. And now my little grassy knoll has a smooth edge. And so I'm going to keep going. It won't take me very long at all, because I want you to watch this technique in its entirety. So in traditional tutorials, you get just the highlights. So somebody will come in and show you a few techniques, and you don't watch the entire process. These lessons that we do with the Jelly Roll Club are live lessons, which means I do the entire block for you, and then I talk about all aspects of the quilt so that you see the entire process from start to finish. I skip nothing. And you know what? If I make a mistake, you get to see that too. And so look, I'm pulling all this in. It's coming in, it's coming in. And I'm just going to pull it with my hands. And like I said, this is a great little technique. If you have like a small bodkin like this that you can hold it with, a chopstick, a point turner, a seam ripper, it doesn't matter. Just use something small to kind of hold those down. You see what I'm saying? Pull them with your seam ripper. And then press the iron down so that you don't burn your fingers, okay? Just be very careful, friends. And if you find that you need to repress, you can always wet it with a little bit of starch and repress it if you don't like how an area turned out. So now the edge of my grassy knoll is getting smoother and smoother. And like I said, if you find that you don't like something like that little peak, you can always come in, add a little bit more starch, and then repress it. No harm, no foul. So I'm coming in. I'm just moving ahead of my little baby iron, and I'm pressing that down. And I'm going to use something small to hold that down. And I'm pushing with my seam ripper so that I don't get my fingers in the way. And I'm pushing it down. And now I'm going to hold my iron. All right. Someone asked, how did I make the starch mix? The starch is simply starch in a can that I sprayed into a little medicine cup. But if you wanted to buy liquid starch that comes in a gallon, if that's all that's available, then that works well too. All right. So now the grassy knoll is ready, and I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to press it from the front now. I'm going to give it a little press. And yes, somebody said my duckbill scissors. I just found those in my scissor pile. Okay, now that this dries, you're going to let it dry for a little bit. I'm going to come in and I'm going to start where I went in the bottom. And I'm going to carefully pull away my freezer paper from the back of my piece. And so now that I have it, what I've done is I've shaped my piece and I'm ready to set it down where I'm going to use it. And so now that all these little things, just pop them back, they will hold their shape. And so I can reuse that again if I want to. So I could put it in a little baggie. It's just a little bit wrinkly, but it's still sticky. And that left no residue or glue on my piece. Now, if I wanted to come in here and do a little bit of Elmer's glue basting, I could do that. If you've ever done Elmer's glue basting, I take regular Elmer's glue and I put it in a little squeeze bottle like this, and I mix it half glue, half water. And you can always take a tiny bit of Elmer's glue, and if you wanted to, you could put little dabs of it right under these spots. If you were not going to iron these down right away, or if you're not going to sew them down right away, you can come in here and do a tiny bit of glue basting. And so what that will do is that will hold your pieces in place. And then I'm going to press this very hard from the back. Okay. So does anybody have any questions that they want to ask at this time while I do the rest? So this is the grassy knoll. And now look at this shape. So now my shape looks like I've needle turned it, but in reality, I just basted it first using the starch method. This is a smooth edge applique. And now I could do whatever I want. I could take a little bit, if I wanted to take a little bit of those, you know, those little bits that you have left over? right, from fusible, I could take a little bit and I could actually fuse baste it at this time or even glue baste it onto the backing. But today I'm actually just going to use a glue stick. So I'm going to measure from the bottom. I'm going to straighten up my block and I'm going to fold this in half. Fold it in half again to get my center. And I am going to see that this is the center so that my house sits, the roof sits right where this middle line is. The roof sits right there. So this the roof line, the center line goes right through here through the roof. So I know that this is going to be my house. So my grassy knoll is going to sit like this. Now, that is going to bother me because if you notice my other blocks, my gnome is about a ½ inch up. And so I use my ruler. And I got this ruler at my local quilt shop, which I love. And so this is the ruler I use. So my ruler comes in about 1.5 inches. And so those are both 1.5 inches. This is 1.5 inches. And this is about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to do the same thing with this one so that when I sew my blocks into my house, they will all be the same height. Somebody wants to know the temperature on my iron. This iron is set on high. So if you see my iron, it has a min, which is 1 dot. Then it has 2 dots. Then it has 3 dots. It is set to the max temperature that it will go. And so my iron is very hot, very, very hot. Does anybody have any questions? All right, so now that we've got the grass, and I know where I'm going to put it, my grass is going to be about this far away from the edge. And then this is the center. I know that I'm going to want my grass somewhere in here. So I'm going to go ahead and take my tiny applique pins that I love, and I'm going to pin it down. So I could use big pins, little pins, but I like these little tiny applique pins because they just stay out of the way, and I can sew with them left in there. I can do whatever I want. So I'm going to center that, and I'm going to pin that in place. And I don't anchor anything on my backing until I am happy with where it's going to be. Now, some people draw the image on the back and do something called back basting. That's another method of applique, and I will show you that at another time. But for today, I'm just going to simply put 2 little tiny applique pins because I can leave them there for the entire time. And I'm going to continue with the process. So I glued the pattern onto the freezer paper, and now I'm going to find the part that I want for the little house. And so I'm going to dig through my fabric scraps. And because this is a spring house, I think that I'm going to use my color wheel, and I'm going to do a color which is complementary. And so that means that orange is a color that complements green. So if you ever look at a color wheel and you want to know what color complements which, orange is a complement of green. So my house is going to be orange. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to grab a little bit of an iron here, and I'm going to lay this here, and that fits. This is a 3-inch strip. And this has been pre-washed and pre-pressed. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to take it onto the back of my fabric, and I'm going to press that freezer paper template down just like that. And now it sticks, but it leaves no residue. Somebody said, I have a color wheel, but I have no idea how to use it. If you guys would like me to do a supplementary lesson on using your color wheel to pick colors, I would be happy to do that. So you just let me know. Remember, the Jelly Roll Club is your club. You decide what you want to learn, and then I create lessons or techniques to teach you how to do that. So that's what this class is all about. So you tell me what you want to learn, and I'll do that for you. So I'm going here, and I'm cutting, cutting, cutting. Like I said, I leave a pretty big edge on it. And I cut about halfway in. Sometimes the little duck bills work better for this. These are sharp little scissors. And now I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to take a regular starch. Let me see if you can see that. I'm going to wet that down, and it gets very, very wet. Very, very wet. And then I'm going to pull that over. And then it makes a newbie look like they're amazing. I'm doing this. Somebody wanted to know what size blocks we're doing. All of the blocks that I'm doing in my quilt are 12.5 inches by 10.5 inches. That's the background size. And you can make them whatever size you want. You can make them bigger or smaller. And that way your quilt is whatever size you want it to be. But I want my quilt to be 60 by 80. And so that's the size I'm going to do it. And do you see where I'm in this corner? And this corner has a lot of bulk. I'm going to take and I'm going to open that. And I'm going to trim across that corner at a 45-degree angle like this. And that'll enable me to fold that down and not leave a bulk in that corner. So I'm just basting it with starch, nothing else. And I'm going to pull this down with my fingers, just pulling it down. And then I just take my iron and I carefully put my iron on there. And my iron has no water in it at all. It's strictly a hot, dry iron. So now my house has a little curve here where it goes in the grassy knoll. If you notice, this house has a curve. I could just leave that loose because this is where the piece overlaps. So because this fits underneath there, I could actually leave the bottom raw and only turn under this side. So this is why the pattern has those little dashed lines. And so you'll see that in a minute. Okay, so for those of you who are wanting to learn how to do this by hand, today I'm going to show a technique for attaching this by hand. If you wanted to sew this on by machine, you certainly could at this point do a decorative stitch around your pieces and sew them on with a straight stitch on your machine. So that's not a problem. You could do it either way. So this corner again has bulk. So I'm going to snip at a 45-degree angle, and that reduces the bulk. It makes like a tiny, tiny miter in there. And so this just saves some time. So the bottom of my house, I'm probably not going to turn under. And based, I'm only going to do the top because that is what everyone's going to see. They're not going to see what's at the bottom. And so now this is my little house. It's going to have a window. And now I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the roof. I could have left this side loose if I wanted to, but I decided to turn it under. And so then this will go right against here, and this will be the roof to my house. Now, I could add a tree if I wanted to, a little slim tree. I could do a weepy tree, or I could do one of the pointy trees that I showed you earlier, but there's going to be, so for example, I could do one of those little pointy trees if I wanted to on either side. So if I wanted to at this time, I could tuck a tree behind here and make a little pointy tree. But I'm not going to put a tree next to this little house. This little house is just going to be plain. So this is my last big piece that I have to do. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. So I will pick a roof. And because I have orange and green, the color that complements orange on the color wheel is purple. So I'm going to find a purple piece of fabric, and it could be any color purple. I think I'm going to do my roof purple. But if I lay that down and I look at it, I go, I'm not a fan of that purple. Maybe I'll pick another purple. I could dig in my box of batiks, and maybe instead of a purple, I'll do something that's adjacent in the color wheel, which is a blue. And so maybe today my little house will have a blue roof. And I think I kind of like that color right there. And so my little house is going to have a blue roof. I could also do a little polka dotted roof if I wanted to. I think a little polka dotted roof would look cute. But my mushroom is going to be that color. So I think I'm going to do a blue roof. And so blue, green, and purple are adjacent to each other on the color wheel. And so the colors that are opposite are their complements. So if you ever want to know what colors go with a quilt, I'd be happy to do a whole series on how to pick color for a quilt. Okay, if you notice, this is a layer cake square. And this piece here measures right at about 5.5 inches tall. And so I'm going to take and I'm going to lay this at a diagonal. And the reason I'm not going to do straight of grain like this on this piece is because I want to ease all of these curves. And if you lay it on the bias, it makes it easier to ease all of those curves. And it just makes it makes it for a happier time when you're trying to turn all those little corners. All right, so now that I've attached the roof, I'm going to do the same thing. This is a batik, so it doesn't matter what side I use. I'm just going to cut, and look what happened there. Do you see there? I got too close. The beauty of this method is I can suddenly lift this entire thing up. It's still sticky, and I'm going to move it over. And now I'm going to press it down again. And this, friends, is why I love the serrated scissors, because it prevents my fabric from slipping when I'm cutting. Sometimes big craft scissors just don't cut it, because when you're trying to cut, they slip underneath your fabric. And especially these are Teflon. These are just an old pair of like Teflon scissors, and they can be really slippery when you're cutting. But a serrated scissor is my favorite when I'm cutting fabric for applique. Don't waste any of these pieces, because you can make crumb quilts, and you can also do little tiny applique details, so don't waste those. All right, so there's my roof. I'm going to save that in my scrap pile, my scrap saver pile. And then this is the same way. I'm going to take and I'm going to trim about halfway to the pattern. I don't want to cut too close to the little house, because the house roof, because then my edge would fray. But batiks are great because they don't fray as much as other stuff. And these are pre-cut batiks. So you should try to wash your fabric that you're going to use in an applique. But you can use a salad spinner. You can wash them in a little salad bowl and then hang them up to dry in your bathroom. You can use a bucket, but you can wash your small pre-cuts and then just hang them up, and don't stick them in the washer and dryer, but just wash them. I wash my batiks with a little bit of retain to keep them from bleeding. And so that way, when I'm done with my quilt, it doesn't run and it doesn't cause me any problems. But applique is one of those methods where I almost 99.9% of the time wash my fabric before. All right. With raw edge applique, you can get fraying, especially after you wash your project. You can get fraying on the edges. Now, some people like it. They like that rustic look, but some people don't. So it just depends on what you want. when I do raw edge applique, sometimes I sew a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch in, and I allow every bit of my edges to fray to give it kind of a little bit of texture. But that's just me. I kind of like how that looks. But it's up to you. And if you notice, I'm just getting it really wet. I'm bringing it in with my fingers. I'm holding it. And then I'm coming through here and I'm going to give it a little press. Friends, I love how you guys help each other in the chat while I'm sewing. I so appreciate that. So if you're able to answer questions, please answer questions. If you want to know where the pattern is for this entire series, I created an entire set of free patterns to share with my online quilty friends. Those are found on my website at www.jellyrollclub.com. One way that you can help us bring free content to this club is by liking and subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell, leaving comments, liking the videos, those all to help us to bring you lots of free content. And I have lots of ideas rattling around in my head. I'm the author of these patterns. And so if you post things made with my patterns, just tell people where you got them. Say, this is a free pattern from the Jelly Roll Club, and just give the creator some credit. I appreciate that. I love sharing my things, but also share back so people know where to pick it up. Let me see. Some people are getting an error page because my current page is a Google Sites page, and some spam blockers will block my page. That especially happens with my Canadian friends. And so, like I said earlier in the broadcast, I'm going to be working on a website between now and the 3rd week of February when we do the next lesson. So it'll make it easier for people to download stuff and reach me. So I'm going to be working with a WordPress template, and I'm going to be creating a website. So my daughter's going to help me. My husband's going to help me. It takes a village. And so they're all going to help me get a website up and running. All right, we're getting there, friends. We're almost done. And so somebody said, how much extra material are you leaving in the folds? And it depends on the piece. On this smaller piece, I left about 3/8 of an inch. But you can leave at least 3/8 of an inch. You can leave more, like in this house. It just makes it easier. So I'm leaving a little bit more. What do I do with my fabric after I wash it? If it's for applique, I do not starch my fabric. And the reason I do not starch my fabric is whether I'm using needle turn or whether I'm doing freezer paper method like I am today, or whether I'm using fusible. When you use a bunch of starch on your fabric, it can make it harder for it to adhere to the fusible. And so your fusible can lift. And so if it's fabric that I'm going to be using for any type of applique, I do not starch it. Now, if it's fabric that I'm using pieced, I starch it and I cut it. It makes it a little bit easier to cut, but not very much. Mainly I use sizing. Some people are in the starch camp. I am the light starching camp. I do a little bit of starch, but not a ton. And so you just continue adding a little bit of starch to all these edges. And before you know it, we've already gotten all of the pieces prepared for this entire house. Look at how fast that was. Doesn't take any time at all. So there you go. Does anybody have any questions so far about starching? The freezer paper method. This is one type of smooth edge applique. right? This is one type of smooth edge applique. So needle turn is a type of smooth edge applique. Freezer paper is a method of smooth edge applique. Interfacing is another method of smooth edge applique. So you pick your poison, whatever it is that you want to do. And so there's lots of extras. Okay, now you see the little point? I'm going to turn that under, and then I'm going to bring it around. So I'm going to turn that under, and I'm going to bring it around. So I'm just going to fold it onto itself. I'm going to hold it down. Like I said, you can hold it down with a scissor. You can use a seam ripper to hold it down. And then I'm going to bring that other edge over on the other side. So now I'm bringing it over. And I don't know if you can see that, but now I'm coming down. And that made it a little bit bulky, so I'm going to clip that out just a hair. So once I have folded, I'm going to come in here and clip this because it's a little bit too bulky for my taste. And so that's the beauty of this method, is it's just starch. So you can undo the starch, you can add more starch, and you keep going. And so now all the bulk is gone. Now I can bring this downward. And that point is going to be right there. So I'm going to take a little bit more starch, and I'm going to baste it. If you boo-boo, all you got to do is wet it down with a little bit more starch again, and then glue, and then fold it back down and press it again. So this is a great method for newbies to do because it's really hard to mess it up. And if you don't like it, you can always just spritz water on it and try it again. All right. Now that I've done this, I'm going to have to do windows for my house and the little shutters. And so for the windows and the shutters, I'm going to show you a totally different method of smooth edge applique, which is an applique that uses interfacing. And you guys saw the interfacing Sunbonnet Sues I did earlier. So you guys saw these little girls. Remember those girls? Yes, I'm going to do a summer series on these, and these have interfacing. So I'm going to show you that in just a minute because I'm going to use that for my window and for my shutters on my little house. So I'm going to do that in just a minute. But first, let me finish this up. And I'm going to show you how to do that. If you have great tips to share on how to do hardware for the doors, somebody was asking about that, you can share it in the chat with our friends. This is a club, and so the more we share, the more we all learn. So that's super. If you can share some tips, that would be great. So I'm going to put a little bit of starch all over that roof. And you can hear that iron sizzle. And there we have it. So now I can take this entire piece. Now that it's ready to go, I have my roof. And I'm going to take that paper out. I do not use Best Press for this method because Best Press does not have enough body. For this particular method, I use traditional faultless starch. So that's what I use, just traditional heavy starch. And that's my favorite for this particular technique. Okay, I'm going to take this out. And that has left absolutely no residue on my piece. And I'm going to bring it down, and it should bounce right back. And I could, if I wanted to, lay it down like this. Give it a little starch on the front. Let it kind of ease. And then press it from the front so that my piece is ready for me to hand applique. You could also machine applique this stuff. But now the little roof of my house is ready. So the roof, this overlaps into here. And then the roof will overlap into this piece here, just like this. And so we're going to have a tiny bit of overlap there. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to remove his little inside. And now I can make, if I wanted to, I could reuse these about 4 or 5 times and they would still stick. So I'm going to set those aside. And I'm going to press this little guy to make sure it all goes back to where it belongs. I'm going to give him a little press from the back. And I'm going to spritz him with a little bit of starch. And I'm going to press him from the front. And so I'm going to stick this under here. And like I said, I love these pins because you could literally press through these little glass head pins. Just pin everything into place and leave it there so when you travel, you could actually take this with you. So let's say you're going to a doctor's appointment or it's in the summer and you're going to a soccer game. You could take these, you could prepare them all like this, pin everything together, and then you could take this on the road. You could roll it up, take it on the road, and then sew as you go. All right, so there's the little roof of the house. And so I'm going to overlap it just a smidge, just like that. Make sure that my roof is straight. And that's what my little house is starting to look like. Like I said, I haven't stitched it down yet because I want to make sure that this is exactly where I want my house. So this is a spring house because on the final pattern, my little house is going to go down here. If you notice, this is my little birdhouse. This birdhouse has a blue roof because I wanted it to be a little bit more vibrant and more, I don't know, almost summery looking. And so that's what I did. I'm going to slide this over so that it fits right under there. Okay. So now that I have this prepared and I have it pinned exactly the way I want it with a little bit of overlap. And if you notice on the pattern pieces, I always try to draw little dots or dashes wherever your pattern is going to overlap so you know what order to sew them in. You always sew from the ground up and then you lay your pieces either tucked under or on top. And so now I have most of my house, and now I'm going to show you a different method that's a smooth edge applique. And that method is involving interfacing. And so interfacing method, you see it used a lot. It's very popular. But if you've never seen it before, I'm going to teach you that to make the other parts of the house. So now that I have this, right, I have it all pinned and it's ready to go. So now I have my house, I have my ground, and I'm just missing these 2 pieces right here. I'm missing the little toadstool, right? I could put him on either side. I could put him here. It's a little mushroom. You know how you have landscaping, or I could put him on this side. It doesn't really matter what you choose, but I like him on this side. So this is maybe where I end up putting him, but I'll create him last. Okay. Does this make sense what I've done so far? Does anybody have any questions? And if you can be a community helper and answer the questions in the chat for somebody else, please do so and I will continue working. Okay. So now I'm going to pull my pattern back out and show you guys a couple of details. So in the body of the house, we have this little window shutters and window situation going on. And for the top, we have this window. And if you don't like the size window that I created, you can make that window bigger if you want. So you don't have to do what I do. You can make yours bigger. So like mine is approximately the size of like this little medicine cup, but you can certainly make your window bigger if you wanted to. Trace with a little piece of wood like this. I might make mine a little bit bigger and then leave this one this size. So I might make this window a little bit larger, and you can do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do the freezer. We did the freezer paper method. Now I'm going to show you the interfacing method for smooth edge. And for this, I use a sheer weight Pellon fusible interfacing. Look at this stuff. It's literally light as air. It has a bumpy side with glue, and it has like a woven side on the other with a grid that's printed. Can you guys see that? And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trace my circle onto this, okay? And so I'm going to take, and I'm going to draw this. I'm going to move my stuff because I don't want to draw on top of that. And I'm going to take, and I'm going to use a pencil because I sometimes get a little carried away with my drawing, and I draw on my fabric or I draw on my things. And so in general, I tend to just use a pencil. And can you guys see that line? You guys can barely see it. So this is going to be my stitching line. And so for my house, I'm going to draw a little circle. I can always put paper underneath and make it easier. Yes, that's baby Nate. That's a drawing of baby Nate. So I'm just going to draw my circle. And so now that I have my circle, can you guys see that? On this ultralight interfacing, I'm going to cut him out. And he doesn't have to be very small. I'm going to give myself lots of room. But this is very sheer. And it's fusible, so it's bumpy on one side and kind of smooth on the other. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to find a little bit of fabric that's a complement of blue, and a complement of blue is red. And so I'm going to make a red window. I could do a yellow so that it looks like sunlight is pouring through the window. What do you guys think? Should I use red or should I use a yellow? Maybe I'll use a yellow. All right, so I think I'm going to use this yellow for the window. And what I have now is the bumpy side and the smooth side. This is the wrong side of the fabric. This is the right side of the fabric. And so I'm going to put bumpy side to pretty side, and I'm going to have them kiss. And yes, this is Valentine's Day, so they are kissing. And so now you should see how the circle is going to look. So I have bumpy side touching pretty side. So if you've ever heard that expression, pretty sides touching, this is what happens here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it off. And so I just have interfacing, bumpy side to pretty side. And I'm going to come over here to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this all the way around and leave no opening. Now, if you don't have a sewing machine, you could actually sew all this by hand. But I'm going to show you how to sew this on my sewing machine. And this is Pellon sheer weight. Yes, Patty, you can use dryer sheets. So if you want to save money, use dryer sheets. That works. They sell expensive interfacing that you could use for this. I use the inexpensive Pellon stuff, but you could most certainly use dryer sheets. When you are done doing your laundry, take them out, press them with a little bit of starch, and then lay them out, spray them, and they're great for this too. So yes, the audience has voted. Yellow is the color I'm using. So I'm going to come over here to my little handy dandy machine, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to sew all the way around this. And so you're actually learning two methods today. You're learning the interfacing method. And you know what? I need to put my glasses on because I don't know about you girls, but these peepers are not what they used to be. So I'm going to have to put my glasses on. There we go. All right, friends. I'm going to go ahead and give her a stitch. And I'm going to go around here. And that stitch is nice and tight. I'm just going to go around. I always keep a neutral thread. I like Aurifil 2330, which is like a beige. I use a pale gray. I use just mainly neutral colors when I piece my quilts, it just makes it easier. So instead of having 20 colors, just buy, ivory, beige, cream, and most of the time it just blends in and you can save money that way. Don't be a thread hoarder. Your thread does get old and it starts breaking. If you have thread that breaks easily when you take and you tug it like this, it's old thread. Don't use old thread. It'll cause your quilts to fall apart. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Yvonne de Villabeagle, and I've been quilting for 35 years. I learned to sew over 40 years ago from a nice lady from Texas, and her name was Jenny Sanders. And Jenny Sanders was my neighbor's grandma, and she lived across the street from us growing up. And one of my favorite things to do after school was go to Ma's house and have sun tea, because she would make tea in this giant jug, and watch her sew. And she had several sewing machines, and so I was just fascinated with her sewing. And she quilted by hand and quilted by machine, and she was just an amazing lady. And I'm just happy that I get to pass on her legacy to anybody else who wants to learn this craft. Okay, so now that I've sewn all the way around, I'm getting off of memory lane now. You can see what I've done. So if you can see on the back, I have sewn. Can you guys see that? I've sewn a complete circle, and now I'm going to trim off the excess. So I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm going to trim the excess. Let me show you what that looks like. Yeah, getting old is for the birds. If somebody had told me what getting old was like, I would have passed on that. You know, I teach high school students during the day. This is my hobby. So I do this on the weekends and at night. But if somebody had told me what adulting was like, I would not have been in such a hurry to grow up. But being an adult does have its perks too. Okay, so this is a fusible, so we don't iron it just yet. So I will take and I will pick this apart like this, and I will snip right through that interfacing. So I'm going to snip that interfacing only, and I'm going to trim not all the way to the edge, but just through the middle. And I'm going to trim this around. Just make little nips to make it easier to ease that. And this is another type of fusible applique. So if you think that fusible web is the only method, this is a different type of fusible. You could definitely do this with dryer sheets and make it non-fusible, but I'm using a fusible interfacing, a Pellon shear weight with a grid. Okay, so now what do? I have this little slit in the middle, and I've trimmed it all the way around. So now I'm going to carefully flip it inside out without ripping all of my interfacing. Wish me luck, friends. Wish me luck. This is a small circle. All right. Most of the people in here are newbies, and that's okay. We love newbies in the Jelly Roll Club. So now that I've got it, I'm going to carefully pull it around. And hopefully I don't rip it, but this is live TV, so if it rips, I'll just do it again. Yep, definitely could use a pinking shear for this. But right now I'm too lazy to go downstairs where I store my things and get my pinking shears out. So I'm just going to clip around and do it this way. When you don't have something, friends, improvise. Quilting doesn't have to be an expensive hobby. Just make do with what you got. All right. Yeah, we see you, Jane. We see you coming through. People are asking if I can see their messages on the chat, and yes, I can. Okay, so now that we have this, right, use a little point turner to get all those little things rounded. And this is another method of smooth edge applique. So I've got this and I'm smoothing it out. Try not to rip it, friends. And then I'm going to pull it towards the center. And now my little window is like this. And what I could do now is I could baste that into place, right? So I could baste it with something. I could glue it into place, or I could press it into place. But it has some edges that are not super straight. And so I'm going to keep pushing carefully until I get it the shape I want. And then I can use my handy dandy wallpaper wooden roller and I can roll that flat. So that's another way of doing this. And I can use my little bodkin, which has a round end. And then I'm just going to carefully push. So tell me in the chat what you're doing with your gnomes. I'm curious as to what is happening to all these little babies I gave birth to. What's happening out there to all these little gnomes? All right, so let's move that out of the way. And I'm going to give it the shape I want with my bodkin. And I could go ahead and press that in place. And as I sew, I'm going to give that some shape. Okay, so I can go ahead and baste that into place by using a little bit of glue baste, or I could just fuse it into place. And so what I'm going to do is, since I like where it's located, and it has a few little bumps on the edges that are not perfect, when I sew it by hand, I'm going to take my finger like this, and I'm going to push that into shape, and then I'm going to take little bites with my needle, little tiny stitches, so that my windows have the shape that I want. So I'm going to baste this in place. So this fusible is now bumpy to the outside. You see that? It's got a little break. It doesn't matter if it's open. And I'm going to take this now and I'm going to lay it on its back, fusible side down, fabric side up, and I'm going to press it. But I'm not going to press it a lot. I'm just going to give it a little bit of heat in the middle. And I'm going to leave it like this so that I can sew it by hand. So this entire block is now ready, with the exception of the windows, for me to sew down by hand. Right? So this little guy, like I said, he has a few little points here where I would have to sew those down. All right. So how do we sew or applique by hand once you've done that? You're going to need, obviously, a needle threader. You're going to need a variety of needles. I like ultra fine applique needles. Those are my favorite. You're going to need a needle threader. If your eyes are bad like mine, you're going to need a pair of reading glasses. Haha, right? And then you're going to need thread. To applique all of these pieces, I'm going to use one color. And I use 100% silk thread. So the thread that I use to applique by hand is 100% silk. Why do I use silk? Because when you look at this thread, it is ultra thin. So by being so thin, this thread, what it does, and let me put my glasses on. By being ultra thin, what it does is it literally disappears. And so I'm going to unscrew that from the bottom. And I'm going to pull it out. And if you notice, look at how thin that thread is. It's ultra thin, but it's the same color as my background. And so when I hand applique, I don't get a blue and a yellow and a white and a green. I get one color thread that matches my background, and I sew everything down, right? My little pins that I'm using that have a glass head are called dipped applique pins. These are dipped applique pins, and they come in a little tiny box. I bought them online. They come in a little tiny box like this, and they're dipped applique pins. They're like a glass, like a ceramic, and so I can iron right through them, and that's why I like them. All right. And so this is the freezer paper method of applique, right? I still have a little window to make, so guess what I'm going to do now? I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut a butterfly for the back of my shutters. So now I'm going to use this, and I'm going to use this for my shutters. So now I have my shutters that are going to go right here, and I'm going to use them probably out of a different color. So I might use blue shutters to match the roof. I'm not sure. I think I will. But my shutters are looking a little bit big, but that's still okay. I like how they look. So I'm going to go ahead and make shutters. I'm going to make those after the show is over. And I'm going to show you how instead to begin the process of sewing this down, right? So I have all my pins. I'm going to pin this guy to death because I love pinning them in place so that they don't move. And I'm going to begin the process of using a little teeny tiny ladder stitch. So I'm going to use 100% silk thread, same color as my background, so that it disappears when I'm sewing. And I'm going to use an applique needle. Let me get that out, see if I can. These magnetic things really cause the needles to stick in there, don't they? There we go. Can we get it out? Can I get it out? Who knows? It's trapped. Let me use a pin. Magnetic pin holders are great because stuff doesn't get lost in your sewing room. There it goes. Ah. So I use magnetic pin holders. Love those guys. All right. Get your glasses out. Let's get ready. So I'm going to need a threader in there because guess what? That head is so small I cannot thread it myself. So I'm going to stick that in there and use ultra thin silk thread, and I'm going to drop it in there. Through there. Pull it through the needle. Voila. If you've never worked with silk thread, it has a very smooth, kind of slippery texture. So one of the things that I sometimes like to use when I'm sewing with silk thread is this thing called Thread Magic. It's a thread conditioner. My other stuff was kind of dry. This is not the same as wax. This is different than wax. It's literally something to just condition the thread to make it easier to glide. And so it has a little bit of a weird finish to it. It's like silicone. So I'm going to pull out about 15 inches of thread, and I'm going to run it across my thread conditioner a little bit. Just give it a run like this, and that will keep my thread from tangling. So I use my thread conditioner and then I put it away. Don't leave it uncapped because it will dry. That's what happened to my other one. And if you will, continue sharing in the chat what you're doing with your gnomes. I just want to know. I'm so curious. I created these for a block of the month, so you can make 12 blocks. But these could certainly be used for pillows and other things. All right, so I made a knot all the way to the end. And I'm going to come from the back. And I'm going to begin in the peak of my little house, my gnome house, and I'm going to shove that under there. And I'm going to begin sewing the top corner. So I'm going to come in here. I don't know if you can see my hands. I'm going to come from behind. Can you see my hands? And I'm going to take a bite of applique right where that fabric touches the background, just like that. It's a little tiny stitch. Can you see that? And so I will come in here and I will give it a tiny bite, and then I come back this way. And those bites are so tiny. Those stitches are very close together, and the stitches are very small. Just take tiny bites. That's why I said you're going to need your glasses, my friends. And then you're going to come in from the back first to the front, and you're going to take a tiny bite. Can you see what I'm doing? Take a tiny, like a 45-degree angle, and come all the way through. And you don't need a thimble for this. It's not required. But I just do little teeny tiny stitches. And if you take a stitch that's too big like this, you're going to be able to see it in the front. I don't mind, but if that happens, you can always push this fabric back just a hair like I just did. And guess what? You're going to hide the fact that your stitch is not perfect, and you just keep going. One of my favorite sayings is finished is better than perfect, and that's true. If you notice, look at how small the silk thread is. So it literally leaves an almost invisible stitch. And so where the needle should be landing should be right here where this fold is. That's where the needle should be landing. Let me see, what kinds of things are you guys making? Some people are making quilts, some people are making placemats, some people are making table runners. I love some of the improvised blocks I've seen out there using this method. There you go. And so I would simply go all the way around and continue sewing all the way around here. Now, when I get to this part, I would do a little tiny ladder stitch and keep going across. Then I would sew down. So when you're sewing by hand, you layer your applique pieces from the bottom to the top, but when you sew by hand, you sew from the top down to the bottom. You sew this way, and then you finish your house. But it is 3:29. And so let me see if anybody has any other questions before I continue. Sewing by hand does require good eyes and good hand coordination. If you've never done it and you want to practice, this little house is a good thing to start with. You could turn them into a pillow. But for some of you, maybe fusible is the way to go. If you don't want your pieces to move, you could always come in here and use a little bit of a glue stick. Do you see how I've pinned these to death? I could take a little bit of a glue stick, run it across the back like this, take my iron and heat it into place, and that keeps my pieces from shifting. So this is a type of glue basting. So if you wanted to do that, you could literally just take a little bit of glue stick like that and then press it, and then none of this will move on you. Like I said, I like to leave my pins inside it, but glue is also an alternative if you don't have little tiny applique pins. So I try to give you as many options as possible so that you can make the quilt the way you can make the quilt and use a method that works for you. Does anybody have any questions? Somebody said, could I machine sew this? I most certainly could. So if I were finished and I wanted to machine quilt this, I most certainly could come in here and do a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from all of that. So I could definitely have somebody machine stitch this. And so that's not a problem. And so there you have it, friends. This is how you prepare all of your applique pieces using the freezer paper method. And you can use a glue stick. And you can use a little bit of diluted Elmer's glue to help baste it down. And then I use a silk thread in order to hand stitch all of this down. And when you hand stitch, it just leaves itty bitty teeny tiny stitches that are nearly invisible. But you could most certainly come in with a fancy machine and do fancy decorative stitches and leave it in place. So you could glue baste it all the way down, then let it dry, take it to your machine, and put some fancy stitches on it. All right, friends. If there are no other questions, that is what my quilt is looking like. I hope your quilt is looking like mine. I think you guys broke my website because so many people were going to it. But that's okay. Like I said, I'm going to be getting a new website. I appreciate you coming. This is what my quilt is going to look like. I changed the yellow because I didn't want it there, and I moved the purple. I'm going to applique or embroider the names of all my family members who are having birthdays. So for example, in January, I'm going to put my stepmom and my nephew and my niece. Under February, I'm going to put my brother-in-law. And so I'm going to be putting the names in the sashing of everybody who has a birthday so that when, you know how we get older and we forget, so that I will remember whose birthday is which month in my family. And so the lines in the window, somebody said, I'm going to use embroidery floss. And let me show you what I mean by that. So for my windows, I'm going to be using embroidery floss. So I've got embroidery floss here, and I'm going to do that for the sashings on my windows. So when you see this little window here, it's going to get embroidered lines this way, and I'm going to do a heavy satin stitch all the way around probably. Anyway, I hope you had a lot of fun. This is going to be a great project. If you make the entire quilt, you need 2 yards of 45 or 1.5 yards of 60. I used a 108 for mine. I used a bunch of scraps for this one. If you do not want to do sashing, you can just cut 12.5-inch strips and then applique your entire row of gnomes and then just do it in rows. So you decide how you want to do it. It's up to you. I appreciate you coming. The replay will be posted at 4 o'clock. So if you missed it, don't panic. The replay begins at 4 o'clock. I just want to thank you guys so much for coming. Here's my little block. He's ready for some extra embellishments. I don't know. I left him like this because I might add a tree. I'll have to decide if I want a weepy tree, a fun tree, a pokey tree. I'm not sure. Maybe even an apple tree. So we shall see. All right, my friends. It was great being with you. I will see you the 3rd Sunday of every single month. That means for February. For February, I will see you again on the 20th of February, and we were going to be doing some St. Patrick's Day projects. I will post the pattern on February the 18th. So if you look on the website, February the 18th is the date that we will meet together again in the live stream, and you'll see my quilt grow. You're going to see my finished Fabio and Felicia. You're going to see baby Nate. You're going to see a little wipes container that I'm making for baby Nate. So come back, stay tuned. I will put a list of all of the supplies I use in the description so that you know what we have. Please hashtag Jelly Roll Club when you post on social media. Let people know we're here. Like, subscribe, ring the bell. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys later. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you in 3 weeks, okay? Bye-bye, friends. I appreciate it. Bye-bye. Hugs and kisses. Bye, friends. Bonjour, au revoir, adios. Adios, amigos.